Namaste all. I, Ankush, a student of IIT Madras, welcome our chief guest, Prof.Michel Danino, respected faculties and dear students on behalf of Vande Mataram family, an independent student body of IIT Madras. Vande Mataram, our national song, inspired hundred of revolutionaries to selflessly jump into the altar of sacrifice during the freedom movement. The song, written by Sri Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay ji in 1870s, continues to motivate us even after a Kardha Satabdi to perform our duties towards our motherland just like we owe it to our beloved mother. Janani Janabhumischa Swargadapi Garyasi, meaning the mother and the motherland is greater than any joy of heaven. This philosophy, which kindles our Rashtra Atma residing in each of us, strengthening the national consciousness. So, to invoke the spirit of Bharatiyata, let us all sing our national song. Before that, I would urge everyone to put their phone in silent mode. I call upon singer Sri Hari Ganesh ji to lead.
Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Sujalam Suphalam, Malayaj Shitalam, Sasya Shamalam Mataram, Vande Mataram, Shubhra Josna Pulakitayamini Pullakusumita Dhrumadala Shobhini Suhasini Sumhadurabhashini Sukhadam Varadam Mataram Vande Mataram Shamalam Saralam Susmitam Bhushitam Dharanim Bharanim Mataram Vande Mataram Vande Mataram.
Our Vande Mataram forum aims to conduct events that introduces and sensitizes the students community about India's rich cultural, economic, socio-political, scientific and technological heritage, its relevance today, contemporary issues and thoughts about the road ahead. Last year, we started an annual lecture series named Sri Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay Memorial Lecture. Every year, we will arrange this lecture in the month of March or April. The first lecture was delivered by Dr. Anirban Ganguly on Articulating Bharat, Presenting Bharat on a Global Stage on 8th April 2017. Today, we are arranging second annual Sri Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay Memorial Lecture titled Is India a Secular Nation? An Unvarnished Look at India's Many Brand of Secularism. Now, I request Chief Guest Sri Michel Danino, Faculty Advisor Professor Ravi Shankar Verma ji and our student coordinator Ajay Kumar ji to come forward and give floral tribute to Sri Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay ji. We welcome our chief guest, Professor Michel Danino, to the dais and request him to resume the seat. Now I request Dr. Jyotirmay Tripathi to welcome our chief guest with fruit basket. Thank you, sir. Professor Michel Danino was born in 1956 at Honfleur, France. He got attracted to India from an early age. He was enamored of the yogis in Bharat, especially Sri Aurobindo and Sri Ma. In 1977, dissatisfied after 4 years of higher scientific studies, he left France for Bharat and started living here. Professor Michel Danino is a student of Indian civilization and its early development. He has authored papers and books in French and English. Recent titles include The Lost River on the Trail of the Saraswati, a multidisciplinary study of the Vedic Saraswati River, and Indian Culture and India's Future. He co-edited with Professor Kapil Kapoor a 2-volume textbook for a CBSE elective course, Knowledge, Traditions and Practices in India, in the year 2013 and 2015. Michel Danino has lectured and taught at many institutions on the foundations of Indian civilization and India's knowledge systems. Since 2011, he has been a guest professor at IIT Gandhinagar, where he is assisting its Archaeological Sciences Center. His other interests include nature conservation and the creation of innovative education material. He is a member of Indian Council of Historical Research. He was, in 2017, a recipient of Padma Shri Award for Literature and Education. Now, I request Professor Michel Danino to deliver the much-awaited talk, Is India a Secular Nation? An unvarnished look at India's many brands of secularism.
Namaste. Thank you very much for this invitation. I have to express my gratitude to the Vande Mataram group. It just happened, I just happened to count the number of talks I have been giving at IIT Madras, the first being in 1999, and this is, I think, the 4th, as far as I can remember. So it's always a privilege to be here and a pleasure, and I have many friends in this institute, in fact, some of whom I could not even find time to contact. Why this topic in particular? Because, well, it is a perennial debate in India. It's always a perennial controversy and a perennial battleground between various ideologies, intellectual groups, and so on. And I thought I would try to explain certain views which are partly rooted in history, partly rooted in the cultural background of this land, and also trying to look quite straightforwardly at certain issues which are usually not discussed when the concept of secularism is debated. In fact, perhaps I should say that there is no proper debate about what is secularism or what should be secularism. Is it something which is desirable after all? Which, if it is, how is it to be defined? How is it to be implemented? You know, this is an endless debate. So I'm not at all claiming that I'm going to solve it once and for all, not at all. I'm simply want to contribute to it by a certain unvarnished look, as I called it, at what the issue involves. Why did I choose this image on the screen? Can any of you, especially the students, identify this place? What is it? What are we looking at? If any student can answer, I would like to give a special reward of some kind. I don't know what yet. I have not thought about it, because the chance of a proper answer from a student, first of all, is a little remote. No? Then the faculty? Oh, there's a young man here who wants to propose. Congratulations. So I owe you a reward. We'll have to figure out what I can offer you. At least an ice cream for sure, but perhaps something more. So this is Rani Ki Vav in Gujarat, and it's all the more commendable to have given this answer, as usually this is not open to the public. So normally you cannot access this point where I took this photograph. Why do I show this? Because it's a well, Vav in Gujarat, is a well, and this is part of the famous step wells of Gujarat and Rajasthan. Now, what is a well? A well is categorized in architecture as a secular structure. This is part of secular architecture. But what do you find? You find the whole cylinder of the well, which is about 10 meters, lined with panel after panel after panel of wonderful sculptures in stone. And when you think, so there is, these panels describe the various avatars of Vishnu and a lot of myths and deities connected to the theme of water, including a reclining Vishnu who's somewhere. I don't know if you can spot him anyway. And as you know, Vishnu reclines on the ocean, on water. So this theme of water is strongly present in the iconography of this well, number one. Number two, there's a huge aspect of technology. How do you sculpt those curved panels with the proper curve? And they are not, of course, totally circular. They are segments of a circle, which were carved on the ground, not in the well, and all of them with the proper curvature, perfectly adjusted, lowered into the well, and erected one on top of each other to perfection. No craftsman in India can do this today. So there's a conceptual aspect, there's a mythological aspect, there's a technological aspect. All of that is what constitutes our heritage. But is this a secular architecture? I don't think so. So anyhow, this is just to, whet your appetite, nothing more. And this is the first question that we should ask. Why do we agree? Why do we argue over secularism at all? What is secularism? I start from the Constitution because this is where the debate originates. Secularism is an English word, of course. And if you look at the original Constitution, it is not there. There's no word for secularism. It doesn't exist in the original Constitution. So this is peculiar. Why should we debate something so intensely which the fathers of the Constitution did not find worthy of including in the Constitution? Number one, in fact, there was a big debate which is extremely instructive, and I would request those who are interested to go through this entire debate. It's all on the internet. It starts about August 1949 and goes all the way to December and a little beyond. And as you know, the Constitution was finally promulgated in January 1950. So this debate went on for a long time on secularism. And we have some very interesting quotations. For example, Jawaharlal Nehru, who is today brandished as a, arch secularist, declared in the Constituent Assembly, another word is thrown up a good deal, this secular state business. May I beg with all humility those gentlemen who use this word of secularism often to consult some dictionary before they use it. That's what we are going to do shortly. We'll consult the dictionary. It is brought in at every conceivable step and at every conceivable stage. I just do not understand it. And of course, he goes on and on. I have to restrict my quotations. There'll be quite a few of them, as you will see in my talk today, unavoidably. So this is an interesting angle. But we had a far stronger declaration, like P.S. Deshmukh, who was Nehru's Minister for Agriculture and a very influential person of those days. And Deshmukh said the specious, oft-repeated and nauseating principle of secularity of the state. I think we are going too far in this business of secularity. So why should it be nauseating? What is it that he finds offensive in this concept, and why was there an attempt to go too far? We have to have a look at that. So where does secularism come from? It comes from the 42nd Amendment, not the first or second or third or fourth, but 42nd Amendment of 1976. I will not go into the historical background to this amendment because it's rooted in the emergency and certain things that Indira Gandhi wanted to change in the Constitution. Let's not deal with that. It's not related to the talk today. But it was part of it, and suddenly, out of the blue, the preamble of the Constitution, which had declared India to be a state, a republic, and so on, now became a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. The two words, socialist, secular, were parachuted, literally speaking, into the 42nd Amendment. They were not there before. And so therefore, India had not been declared to be socialist. Socialist was not defined, but I'm not going to touch the topic today. And the word secular was introduced, again, undefined. This is extremely strange because if you look at the Constitution, every single word with a legal or consequence or related deeply to the polity of India is clearly defined. You will have definitions for all important words. Secular is not defined. So if a word in the Constitution is not defined, what are we to understand? We are to understand that we should accept the dictionary definition. That's what Nehru said. Let's go back to your dictionaries. So there is a certain definition of the word secular in the dictionaries, which is rooted in the European concept. I will explain in a minute. So if you look at the Oxford Dictionary, it says, principle of separation of the state from religious institutions. And if you look at the Webster, it has indifference to or rejection or exclusion of religious and religious considerations. Now the Oxford Dictionary is rooted in the 18th century history of Europe, where the age of enlightenment, all the great philosophers like Voltaire in France undermined the foundations of Christianity and the principle that political powers had to be somehow backed by the church or sometimes had to integrate representatives of the church. And this had been the whole history of medieval Europe. So suddenly there was an awakening, intellectual first of all, to the fact that we don't need religion to rule over us. And we don't want this religion, in particular Christianity, to rule over us. Severe limitations of the Christian belief systems, power systems were pointed out, and a growing demand for rejection of them was the contribution of the 18th century in particular. This is not exclusive to Christianity. There is one case at least in the Islamic world, which is Turkey. And in Turkey, in 1923, you would be familiar with the revolution of Turkey, which created the Turkish Republic. Mustafa Kemal was the leader of that revolution. The main goal was to overthrow the Islamic rule of the caliphate. And therefore, Turkey was declared to be a secular republic, right? So this is the Oxford definition, the principle of separation of the state from religion, from religious institutions or powers or various kinds of ramifications. The second definition by Webster is simply what I refer to with the example of, for example, secular architecture. You have sacred architecture, secular architecture. You have, these are especially European binaries. In India, all of them would have to be qualified to a great degree, but I'm not going to touch upon this in my talk today. For example, you have sacred literature, secular literature. You have sacred music, secular music, and so on and so forth. So all these binaries can be applied to all human activities. But today we're going to be concerned with the first aspect reflected in the definition by Oxford. Now, one immediate observation imposes itself, which is that there is no word for secularism in any ancient Indian language. In fact, prior to 1950, I would be very surprised, prior to 1950, or even perhaps 1960 or 70, whether we could find, but let's say prior to independence to be safe, whether there is any word for secularism in any Indian language would be very surprising. So in Hindi, Dharma Nirapekshata is the official word for secularism, which means basically indifference to religion or neutrality towards religion. But this is a recent coinage. You will not find it in any classical or medieval Hindi literature or thought. Same thing in Tamil, Marachar Patra, neutrality towards all religions. This is the official term. So I believe we can extend this to most Indian languages, but these are all recent coinages. And to see whether they have any root in Indian history, well, let us have a quick look at ancient India. Why do we have to discuss in the Indian context either the concept of separation of state and religion or the concept of neutrality towards religion? And please note that this neutrality towards religion is actually a kind of, or indifference to religion, is actually an Indian definition. It is not the accepted mainstream dictionary definition of secularism. So first of all, it's important to realize that in ancient India there was never anywhere in India the concept of a state religion, religion of state, which is what medieval Europe suffered under. And that is what created as a reaction the Age of Enlightenment, where 18th century philosophers across Europe started protesting against this notion of state religion and saying we must separate religion from the state, from the polity. There is not a single Indian ruler who ever thought or tried in ancient India, by ancient, let us roughly say pre-medieval India, to keep things simple, who thought of imposing a religion. It could have been done. Ashoka, for example, as you know, was won over to Buddhism. People say converted. This word converted is tricky and does not, to my mind, apply to the actual historical context. Let us say he was won over. His heart was opened up by the Buddhist teaching, and then he started spreading what he called Dhamma in Prakrit, because his edicts are in Prakrit. And Ashoka would have had the power, if he had wanted, to impose Buddhism as a state religion, compulsory religion throughout his empire. He never attempted that. On the contrary, he gives us this very well thought out recipe for religious harmony or coexistence. Of course, in his days, what does he mean by religious harmony or coexistence? He's referring to the Vedic, Buddhist, Jain, Ajivika, and a few other sects, belief systems, thought systems. There's, of course, no question of Christianity in those days or Islam. So perhaps the problem was simpler to address. Nevertheless, there were doctrinal frictions, rivalries, differences. And his recipe was, number one, do not show excessive devotion, what today we call fanaticism, towards your preferred religion or school of thought. Do not praise it too highly. Number two, do not condemn other religions or schools of thought. It seems very obvious, perhaps, but it's not so obvious when you look at the history of Christianity and Islam. Number three, all should be well learned in the good doctrines of other religions. He accepted that there could be bad doctrines also. But they were good doctrines, useful things that we can learn from all these belief and thought systems. So these are the 3 points that he gives in Edict number 12, Major Rock Edict, which all of us who are concerned with these issues should read in full. I'm just giving you a brief summary here. But it did not occur to him that perhaps he could impose Buddhism on the whole empire. Not at all. He patronized Vedic sacrifices as much as the Buddhist Sangha. So therefore, this concept of state religion is alien to ancient India, and I could give many more examples. For lack of time, I'll mention only Kharavela. Kharavela is a famous Jain emperor. He was the head of the Kalinga Empire. And he gives us this enormous, magnificent inscription. If anybody has visited the Udayagiri, Khandagiri hills near Bhubaneswar, you might have seen it just towers over you. It's 3 meters long. And this inscription, it's a Jain emperor, is all about his military campaigns. How Jainism reconciles with military campaigns is another issue I won't go into. But he boasts that he has fought a few North Indian kings and recovered from them stolen Jain images, statues that had been taken out of the kingdom and the empire, and that he has brought them back and reinstated them. And but yet, though he was a very great devote of Jainism, he portrays himself in that inscription as the worshipper of all religious orders, the restorer of shrines of all gods. So he doesn't exclusively, portrays Jainism as his one objective or his one preferred religion at all, and he never tried to impose it. So you could repeat examples. There are lots. There's a wealth of inscriptions with the Pandyas, the Pallavas in South India, for example, boasting that they patronize all cults. These examples can easily be multiplied. This is the ancient Indian ethos, thought system, belief system. People call it tolerance. It's much more than tolerance. It is, if you really think about it, it is something deeper. This word of tolerance is extremely shallow. It's a kind of passive, negative word. This is a much more positive attitude which got embedded in the Indian ethos. So and that is now the next question, if there was no state religion, why do we talk of secularism, which normally means the separation of state and religion? Why do we have to talk about it? If there is nothing to separate, why should we insist on this concept of secularism? So therefore, my first argument is that the concept of secularism has no relevance whatsoever to the Indian context. I would like to see an analysis showing me that there is a need to protect the Indian state from religious incursions. The only thing that Indian rulers were under compulsion to follow, well, theoretical compulsion. In practice, it's a completely different ball game. But under theoretical compulsion to follow was a code of ethics, a certain code of dharma, which is expounded in large number of texts. For example, when Bhishma lies on his bed of arrows, before dying, as you know, he took enough time to schedule his death suitably so that he had enough time to give Yudhishthira a long discourse on the duties of a king. And this is possibly one of the very first texts in India on it's actually a code of governance. It is reflected in a lot of other texts, partly in Arthashastra of Kautilya. Even Ramayana has long lectures on what a ruler is supposed to do, not to do, and so on. So these were considered to be, and you have a lot of Raja Niti texts all the way to the medieval times, quite a few of them. So this is what the rulers were supposed to be under compulsion to follow. And again in inscriptions, you have a lot of kings boasting that they follow this code of ethics. You have even a Pandya king boasting, I forget who, which king in particular, but boasting that his reign was more dharmic than the reign of Rama himself. You see? So these models were there. Whether they were followed or not in practice, again, is a totally different ballgame. We can't go into such a historical analysis. But this is what was, let us say, the model that was over the minds of the rulers, and not any particular religious system. So if we look at the inheritance of this ethos, we see that India has for ages past been a country of pilgrimages. All over the country you find these ancient places from Badrinath, Kedarnath and Amarnath, high up in the snowy Himalayas, down to Kanyakumari in the south. What has drawn our people from the south to the north and from the north to the south in these great pilgrimages? It is the feeling of one country and one culture. So this is the cultural, fundamental cultural unity of India. And who tells us all this? Jawaharlal Nehru himself, again the arch secularist, who acknowledges that there is a certain background which we will call cultural, which is behind India as a nation. And another quotation which today would be regarded as highly controversial, even offensive to a large proportion of our intellectuals. India has all along been trying experiments in evolving a social unity within which all the different peoples could be held together while fully enjoying the freedom of maintaining their own differences. This has produced something like a United States of a social federation whose common name is Hinduism. Very objectionable, isn't it? Who said that? Rabindranath Tagore himself. What does he mean by Hinduism? Obviously not some narrow set of rituals and a few texts. He means what precisely created this national network of cultural integration that Nehru was referring to under purely the angle of pilgrimages, but there are many more angles which could be invoked when you look at the cultural unity of ancient India. So this was in 1917. Now let me move to the freedom struggle, because here something happens. You know, there was an ancient concept in classical period of Indian history of sacred geography. It was the land that was regarded as sacred, and there were pilgrimage networks, there were associations between every landmark and some episode of the Ramayana or some episode of the Mahabharata and their heroes. But in the late 19th century, all this was transformed into the concept of Mother India. You know, Bharat Mata. Bharat Mata is not an ancient concept. Well, it is kind of implied in the ancient concept of sacred geography, but the term Bharat Mata does not occur in any ancient text. It is only from the late 19th century. Suddenly, and of course Bankim was one of the architects of this concept, suddenly this concept of the land as a sacred land and a culturally woven civilization became Bharat Mata. And this became a source of major inspiration to a lot of freedom fighters. We sang just earlier Vande Mataram, but is it a secular song? Yes or no? My answer is no. It's not secular. Why should it be secular? It doesn't claim to be secular. Bankim has absolutely no interest in secularism. He says this is our land, our nation to be born, because of course it was not yet born, is a goddess. Let us worship her as a goddess. There's no idea of secularism. So then, however, it became the mantra in 1905, as you know, of the awakening struggle for freedom, first of all in Bengal, where the entire population protested against the British partition of Bengal, 1905, and Vande Mataram suddenly was repeated in the streets. And I would like to point out that though certain Muslim politicians later on said we cannot repeat Vande Mataram because it involves bowing to something which is not the, Allah, and Islam forbids us from doing so, it is on record that the first demonstrations for a few months in the streets of Calcutta, Hindus and Muslims together demonstrated and sung Vande Mataram together. There are newspaper records to that effect. Anyway, that's a detail. The point is that this is what stirred the people. This unsecular song is what one of the ingredients in the awakening of the national movement. And you can find easily in all the writings of the great leaders of that movement, say Tilak, a lot of references to this concept. By the grace of providence, we shall ere long be able to consolidate all the different sects into a mighty Hindu nation. This ought to be the ambition of every Hindu, he said in 1906. Sri Aurobindo, in his famous Uttapara speech, 1909, when he came out of prison, Alipur jail, said, I say no longer that nationalism is a creed, a religion of faith. I say that it is the Sanatana Dharma, which for us is nationalism. So what do we have here? Is this a secular concept of the nation or of nationalism? Not at all. And nor does it claim to be. So what's going on? Bipin Chandra Pal, Lala Lajpat Rai, Subramanya Bharati and his stirring poems on Bharat Mata and Mother India, all of them have the same concept of nationalism. I am not saying that all freedom fighters shared it. There are all kinds of shades and nuances, all the way to even atheism. For example, if I take Subhash Chandra Bose, nobody can accuse him of having been, let us say, a mistake or a religiously minded person. Nevertheless, he had very strongly behind his whole aspiration for freedom, he had this concept of Indian civilization. And he refers to it often. He says, for example, Indian nationalism is neither narrow nor selfish nor aggressive. It is inspired by the highest ideals of the human race, Satyam Shivam Sundaram. Nationalism in India has instilled into us truthfulness, honesty, manliness, and the spirit of service and sacrifice. Even at the risk of being called a chauvinist, see, he's not afraid of being a chauvinist. Today, everybody is scared of being a chauvinist, but not he. I would say to my countrymen that India has a mission to fulfill, and it is because of this that India still lives. So he doesn't call it a mystical mission or a religious mission or a spiritual mission, but a mission of civilization. See? So it is not exactly the same, but it's not very different either. Let's come back now to the Constitution. So my point here was that the freedom fighters were animated, at least the most leading freedom fighters were animated by a certain idea of India, which was definitely not secular by our modern definition of secularism. Which is why you find modern historians, for example, Bipin Chandra, who wrote several volumes on the freedom movement, actually accusing all these of having been the roots of communalism in India. So they accuse quite openly. I could have given you quotations. They accuse Tilak, they accuse Sri Aurobindo, they accuse Bipin Chandra Pal of being the cause and the origin of Indian communalism. So this is a very interesting debate, but I want to come back to the Constitution because there we do have a major problem which is not faced as far as I can see. See, the preamble of the Constitution guarantees equality of status and opportunity irrespective of any Indian's religion, caste, or gender. And of course, this is as it should be. I mean, in an ideal nation, we would all share this aspiration. There can be no doubt about it. And this is what should certainly unite all Indians, at least in this respect. However, very soon into the Constitution, it introduces differences based on religion. Articles 28, 29, 30 give special rights to religious and linguistic minorities, especially rights to manage their places of worship and educational institutions. Now, the question is very simple. If you give special rights to certain followers of certain religions and not to others, can you call yourself secular? Not by the definition of the Oxford Dictionary. Absolutely not. There is no way this is secular. This is against the European concept of secularism. So then, of course, people have gone into all kinds of long explanations These are minorities. I'm coming to the question of minorities in a few minutes. And therefore, they do need special rights. But nevertheless, whatever explanation you want to bring up, at the end of the day, you have to face this paradox. That you say all Indians have the same opportunity. This is the word that the Constitution uses, equality of opportunity. And then you say Hindus will not have the right to manage their education institutions and places of worship. It doesn't say Hindus. It is by implication. So, therefore, this is not secular. So, if this is not secular, why did we have to say, perhaps it's all right to have a constitution which is not secular? After all, it's for the nation to decide. If the nation as a whole decide that these special rights are okay, fine. But then let us have the honesty of saying, we will not have a secular constitution. Why do we have to say, Amendment 42nd, this is a secular nation, and then we have all these contradictions. So there is a problem there, and it is not sufficiently debated, and we are allowing our intellectuals to have all kinds of somersaults so as to land back on their feet and claim that we are a secular nation. As per the Constitution, we are not. This is a simple stand which I take. And if we want the Constitution to be genuinely secular, at least these special privileges should be extended to all Indians. This is all you have to do. Equal rights. You want to give rights to the minorities? Fine. Give the same rights to the majority. It's as simple as that. Why should the state, which considers itself secular, insist on managing Hindu temples, for example, or large Hindu educational institutions? How can it do that? Of course, we know that this problem is far more complex than I am making it out to be. For example, we know that a number of large Hindu temples are sources of enormous wealth. And we know that our politicians are terribly tempted by wealth, and therefore this is also a factor in asserting that Hindus cannot manage their places of worship. It's only the state that can do it. Because Hindus are too divided. This is the argument which has been again and again expressed by politicians as to why can't Hindu manage their places of worship. Because they are too divided. I'm coming to that in a moment. So therefore the state has to do it. Otherwise it will be a mess. Right, but this is not secular. There is no Western secular nation, to my knowledge, that manages churches or mosques or whatever. None at all. If they claim to be secular, they keep away from religious places. This is normally what a secular nation is expected to do. Civil code. Now this is something which has bothered the Supreme Court again and again. And there are at least 3 or 4 times in the history of independent India where the Supreme Court mandated the government of India, this goes back at least 30 years, if not more, mandated the government of India, the central government, to come up with a draft for a civil code. Because this is what you would expect from a secular nation. If you have special laws based on religion for things like marriage, divorce, inheritance, can you call yourself a secular nation? Now, once again, it's for the nation to decide. If the nation is comfortable having different laws for different religious denominations, fine. But then why should you insist on calling yourself secular? This is the contradiction I would like to point out. So my point is that we do not have a secular polity or state structure in India. And perhaps it is all right not to have it, but then why do we insist on having it? This is the tension behind all these debates. But there is another big tension, and it is the very concept of majority and minority. At this point, I need a little water, because that is usually where things heat up. Where does this concept come from? Very simple, from the colonial rule. It is the British who introduced the concept of minority, and the amorphous, as they called it, amorphous, stagnant majority of Hindus. These are terms which recur in the colonial literature. So the Constitution fairly passively repeated this concept of majority and minority. Not totally passively, as I will show you in a few minutes. So we have the concept mostly of Muslim and Christian minorities. They are the ones which are in the news. We rarely speak much of either minorities like the Sikhs or the Parsis, the Jews, very rarely. Of course, there have been such tiny numbers now. There are actually many other minorities in India, but these are the two minorities which we keep hearing about. I'd like to point out that the Muslim minority has today 195 million members. For a minority, I think that's quite a large number. It is 3 times the population of UK, for example. So anyhow, whether it qualifies as a minority or not, we can keep that in suspense. Christians numerically are a minority, but things are not so simple. I lived in the Nilgiris of Tamil Nadu for 21 years, and I saw that all the best real estate, the best bungalows, the largest tea estates belonged to Christians. In those days, almost all the schools, government-aided schools, were managed by Christians. All the hospitals, barring 1 or 2, things have changed a bit now, were Christian hospitals. Do you call this a minority, an oppressed, suppressed minority, when it dominates the landscape so much? Of course, you might say it's only one district. But I can repeat this, I think, to some extent here or there. So what exactly, should a minority be simply reduced to numbers? If so, are Hindus in Kashmir accepted as a minority? This question was recently put to the Supreme Court, and as always in India, we are very good at throwing questions back and forth. Nobody wants to answer, you know. So Supreme Court asked the government to decide whether Hindus in Kashmir, who happens to be numerically, in minority, should be accepted as a minorities, because if so, under the Constitution, they should have certain rights. As of now, they don't. Very strange. We thought that minorities would have certain rights and privileges, but only certain minorities, it appears. So you can see that these questions are not simple. And I'm not trying to give cut and dry answers today. But more than the question of minority, I want to address the question of majority. When we say the majority, the clear implication from the language is that we expect a monolithic, integrated, coherent majority, which incidentally our politicians have been arguing against when they say that don't give Hindus the right to manage their temples because they are hopelessly divided. So if Hindus are hopelessly divided, why should they be regarded as one majority? It is true, in fact, that the identity of Hindus is not a simple thing. Just keep talking to as many Hindus as you can across India. I've done it in my small scale. You will find that many Hindus, perhaps most, I cannot offer statistics, identify themselves first and foremost through their jati, through their community. Community identity with many Hindus is more important than attachment to Hinduism. This has been my own personal experience. You may contest it. This would have to be, ascertained perhaps through some significant survey. Second is language. I know many Hindus, Tamil Hindus, for whom being Tamilians, that means Tamil speaker, is more important than being a Hindu. So you have community, you have language, you have religion, all of these, and these are part of this identity. There's no doubt it's a complex identity because it has been shaped by so many factors across history. So you have caste or community, as you wish to call it, and sometimes also geography. Speak to a Bengali, for example. I mean no offense. I have many dear Bengali friends. But for a Bengali, Bengal is very important. The geography is very important. So therefore, all these are part of the identity. You cannot say that Hindus are a monolithic majority. They are not. And it's very easy to show why when you have had a Hindu movement, for example, the largest Hindu movement, as far as I can see, you can suggest others if you wish, in post-independent India has been the movement for the construction of a Ram temple in Ayodhya. I think this should be one of the largest. How many Hindus in India have been active in this? A very small fraction. I would be surprised if it was more than 10 or 15 or 20%. Of course, some regions like Uttar Pradesh, obviously, and a few other northern Indian states had a greater following. In South India, there was almost no participation as far as I could see, no mass participation or even enthusiasm for such a movement. You do not have a single Hindu response to such issues or to such movements or to such problems. So it is true that Hindus are divided, hopelessly or not, I cannot say. And this is actually one feature of their identity, that Hinduism has promoted whatever the social phenomenon of caste is. It's completely different. I'm not going to talk about it. But culturally speaking, Hinduism has promoted endless diversity. It is not tolerance. It is encouragement of diversity. It has encouraged people to not only follow their own paths, but to create new paths all the time, all the time. Any Hindu today can stand up and say, I'm the new avatar. Fine. The only question is whether he can gather enough followers. That's the only question. If he or she can, why not? So you have a new avatar. So therefore, there is no limit. And therefore, this is a very complex identity made of endless number of strands. Therefore, my point is that this is something I realized in the course of my study of India, and I don't belong to any caste or region or language. It is that there is no such thing as one Hindu majority. It doesn't exist. In that sense, our politicians who say Hindus are, hopelessly divided, there is some little truth. Of course, it's distorted, but there is some little truth in that. So if there is not one Hindu monolithic majority, why do we speak of the majority-minority binary? Has the Constitution not done a disservice to independent India by enshrining this binary in it? This is a question which I think we need to think about deeply. And let's go back to the Constituent Assembly, 1949. Jamul Hussain, you can guess his religion by his name. He was a member of the Constituent Assembly from Bihar. And he says, I want to tell the House, sir, that there is no minority in this country. I do not consider myself a minority in a secular state. And it's very strange that we have a Muslim representative speaking of a secular India. And he says there is no such thing as minority. I've got the same rights, status, and obligations as anybody else. I wish those who consider themselves as the majority community would forget that there is any minority today in this country. Very remarkable. Was he heard? No, of course not. This kind of view didn't find any expression in the Constitution. He was not the only one. Damodar Swarup Seth, from what was formerly United Province, today Uttar Pradesh. I feel, sir, that in a secular state, minorities based on religion or community should not be recognized. If they are given recognition, then I submit that we cannot claim that ours is a secular state. Recognition of minorities based on religion or community is the very negation of secularism. This is something that Oxford Dictionary would agree with. H.C. Mukherjee, a member from West Bengal, someone told me recently that he was a Christian. I've not been able to check. Doesn't matter for our purpose. He asked, are we really honest when we say that we are seeking to establish a secular state? This was part of this whole debate, whether secularism should be integrated in the constitution, and the final decision was no. Are we really honest when we say that we are seeking to establish a secular state? If your idea is to have a secular state, it follows inevitably that we cannot afford to recognize minorities based upon religion. And finally, Vallabhbhai Patel himself, in the long run, it would be in the interest of all to forget that there is anything like majority or minority in this country, and to accept that in India there is only one community. And the Constituent Assembly stood up and applauded. This was the conclusion of this debate. Unfortunately, the Constitution did not follow this line of thought. For good or bad, I don't think I would have done much better had I been there. I'm not trying to criticize the fathers of the Constitution. They had a very difficult job to do. They did the best they could. But is it not time that we should reflect on these issues a little more deeply than we are doing? Came Munshi, the great statesman. He was a minister in several post-independent ministries. He was a freedom fighter with Mahatma Gandhi. He was, as you know, the founder of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, and he had very strong cultural interests. He said, the word secularism in India has no bearing on the attitude or conduct of individuals nor of religious groups. However, it has been used as a slogan of varying significance. Slogan of varying significance, that's a very good phrase. In its name, anti-religious forces sponsored by secular humanism or communism condemn religious piety, particularly in the majority community. In its name, minorities are immune from such attention and have succeeded in getting their demands, however unreasonable, accepted. In its name again, politicians in power adopt a strange attitude which, while it condones the susceptibilities, religious and social, of the minority communities, is too ready to brand similar susceptibilities in the majority community as communalistic and reactionary. This was written in the 1940s. I hope it rings a bell in some of you at least. How secularism sometimes becomes allergic to Hinduism will be apparent from certain episodes related to the reconstruction of the Somnath temple. These unfortunate postures have been creating a sense of frustration in the majority community. So you can see here a lot of tensions already building up. And these tensions are simply the result of the choice of wrong words and wrong concepts, nothing else. And they could have been avoided, in my humble opinion. I will end this talk with some thought on secularism and national education, because I'll give the example, maybe the simplest way to look at it is that at IIT Gandhinagar, I bumped into the husband of a visiting faculty from abroad. This gentleman was brought up in erstwhile Yugoslavia, today Serbia. So he went to school and he studied at school Mahabharata, Ramayana and Bhagavad Gita. This was part of the curriculum. This is what he told me. So I told him that this is taboo in India. There's no hope to study Mahabharata, Ramayana, Gita. He could not believe it. He could not believe it. He said, how come the Indian school system does not teach that? We had to study it at school, not the whole of it. A little bit of the main plot of the stories and some chapters and some passages. It was not, of course, a full study. So this is the whole question. Why don't we? Because we are supposed to have a secular education, right? And even Sanskrit was objected to by a certain class of intellectuals because Sanskrit was supposed to have a religious, spiritual background and therefore should not be taught. It took the Supreme Court's judgment, Kuldeep Singh, in, I think, 1990 something, I forget the precise date, to pass a judgment which is quite enlightening. Luckily, he was a Sikh. Had he been a Hindu, he would have been very heavily criticized, but nobody could say anything, where he explained at length that Sanskrit is central to our heritage and its teaching at the school level cannot be said to be unsecular. It is very strange that it took a judgment of the Supreme Court to reassure us that the teaching of Sanskrit would not be unsecular. The greatest fear that some of our intellectuals seem to have. So would it be unsecular to teach some lessons? Of course, not the whole text. It would take the 12 years of the schooling system to go through the entire Mahabharata, Ramayana, and so on. There is no question of that. But would it be unsecular to expose our children to the main teachings, the main story plot of these stories, which after all, did manage in culturally integrating ancient India, which is a fact, easy to demonstrate. All the way to the tribal world, the stories, the various episodes, the heroes, and the, I was going to say moral lesson, but moral is a very poor word. Anyway, the ethical or the dharmic lessons, whatever you want to call them, did travel to every nook and corner, not only of India, but Southeast Asia and Central Asia, and even partly to China and Japan. So would it be unsecular to teach these or similar texts that have great ethical lessons, say the Panchatantra? How many schools teach the Panchatantra or simply give? So we have a great paradox here, as far as I am concerned, which is that everybody laments about loss of value. Just open today's newspaper and see the number of horrific crimes, and everybody says, you know, as a society we've gone astray, we've lost all values. Fine, maybe we have, but where do these values come from? So we say, well, in the 1980s, the Ministry of Human Resource Development said, we will have value education. So we'll have special lessons for value education, probably on Saturday morning or something. Those few hours of value education, first of all, became very boring because they ended up being just some kind of a preaching, which of course school students would resent. Number two, they were very soon encroached upon by the mathematics class and the science classes and so on, because that is what you needed at the exam anyway. You didn't need value education at the exam, right? Who needs value education at the +2 exam? Who? So therefore, we have secularized, if I may say so, in Indian school education. It's not secularized, it's that we have deculturalized it. And there is certainly a way to present Indian culture without demanding that the listener should turn into, let us say, a devotee of Sri Krishna or Lord Rama. So if you wish, you can keep that aspect out and simply have the story, have the, why did the Pandavas had to fight the Kauravas? What was the big idea behind this bloodshed? What is this whole tension in the Gita between Arjuna's gospel of ahimsa almost and Sri Krishna's spurring him to war? Etc. All these big questions. Why does Yudhishthira himself, why does he have to lie to win the war? Why does Arjuna treacherously kill his brother Karna and so on? All these big questions which are about ethics, which are about dharma, which try to define and discuss dharma, do not need the so-called religious aspect. That could be kept separate. So therefore, we have a problem there that we complain against the loss of values, but we have slowly but surely eliminated out of the educational system what have been, after all, the great texts that have imparted certain values to the society. So, I would like to simply read this quotation by Sri Aurobindo. This was written in 1908, 1909, when he was not yet known as Sri Aurobindo. He was Aurobindo Ghosh in Bengal, and he was one of the leaders of the revolutionary movement, writing in a daily called Vande Mataram, after, of course, Bankim's song, and later on in another weekly called Karma Yogin. And this is what he writes. And please note that Sri Aurobindo had a experience, direct, hands-on experience of the Indian educational system, because he taught himself, first of all at Baroda, when he returned to India under the Maharaja's college. He taught French and English and a few other topics, and then he was called to the Bengal National College in Calcutta, 1905, which was the first Swadeshi institution of education, national education, and he became its first principal. And there he taught not only literature, French, English, but also history and geography. So he was familiar with the Indian system, which of course in those days was the British system. And this is what he writes. He says, in India, we have been cut off by a mercenary, this is a very consciously used word, and soulless education from all our ancient roots of culture and tradition. National education, in case you think that he wants to take us back to a, long dead tradition, orthodox, narrow, and so on and so forth, not at all. This is what he says, is the education which, starting with the past and making full use of the present, builds up a great nation. Whoever wishes to cut off the nation from its past is no friend of our national growth. Whoever fails to take advantage of the present is losing us the battle of life. We must therefore, and this is a whole agenda you might say, we must therefore save for India all that she has stored up of knowledge, character, and noble thought in her immemorial past. We must acquire for her the best knowledge that Europe can give her and assimilate it to her own peculiar type of national temperament. He is therefore not at all opposed to Western knowledge of any sort. We must introduce the best methods of teaching humanity has developed, whether modern or ancient. And all these we must harmonize into a system which will be impregnated with the spirit of self-reliance. This was, of course, the glorious age of Swadeshi in Bengal, so as to build up men and not machines. So how far have we progressed in our educational thinking from those days? And time permitting, I could give you many more quotations from Rabindranath Tagore, from Gandhi, from all the great leaders of the freedom movement on what should a system of national education be. And all of them agreed on a simple point, that it should be rooted in the best of Indian culture. The best, I use purposely these terms, because not all of Indian culture is necessarily relevant or desirable, right? So this is what they wanted. Is it what independent India did? I'm afraid not. So here we have the, running through this quotation, the word secularism does not appear, but it runs through it. And by supposedly secularizing education, what we have done is to simply deculturalize young Indians. And my own experience, I teach a course on the foundations of Indian civilization at IIT Gandhinagar at the master's level. My own experience is that young Indians, my apologies, are terribly ignorant about their own country. That doesn't mean that you should be scholars of the Shastras and so on, not at all. I don't mean any sort of orthodox knowledge. I mean understanding what has made this civilization tick through, we say usually 5,000 years. It's not a bad figure if you want to include the Harappan civilization, that's okay. So what has made it tick through those 5 millennia, when other civilizations did disappear? Ancient Greece is no more. The modern Egyptian has no connection with the pyramids or the pharaohs at all. But we still have a lot of living connections with that remote past. And therefore, it must be something that has somehow given strength to the people despite all these social problems, issues, sometimes defects, and sometimes unacceptable discriminations. And I would like to remind you that no society on earth has been perfect. And European, Western societies have had their share of dark spots. World wars were not the contribution of India. Genocides, concentration camps, slave trade are things which never occurred in this land. So therefore, yes, dark spots by all means, but there were also bright spots. Why not use them? If they can contribute strength, if they can help build up this social harmony that we are all thirsting for, at least there is no disagreement that all of us want social harmony, why not use these elements that can contribute to it? So these are some of my imperfect, brief thoughts that I wanted to share with you, and they are not meant as a final answer. They are simply meant to trigger, hopefully, a debate, but a real debate, a meaningful debate where we're not afraid to call a spade, and where we are not abusing each other, because as far as I have seen in recent years, there has not been a meaningful debate on secularism. There's been a lot of mudslinging, a lot of demonization, maybe on both sides, I don't know, on 3 sides or on 4 sides, whatever it may be, but we are not yet intellectually mature enough to debate calmly across known disagreements. Known disagreements. We know that we would disagree on certain things, but we cannot debate on the basis of this. So if I can have contributed even in a small way, I'll be more than happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that splendid talk. I have 2 questions which are kind of related. So in India, we had 250 years of... In India, we had 250 years of close contact with the... Hello. Yeah, so in India, we had...
If you move here, I think it should be safe.
It's okay. Yes. Yeah, thank you for that wonderful talk. It's very inspiring. So I have 2 questions which are related. So in India, we had 250 years of very close contact with the West through the British and different kinds of contact with Europe. But this kind of assimilation that Sri Aurobindo is talking about, of what Europe has to give, it never happened in the popular culture of India. In fact, very often we think of Indian culture as something very different from the West. We defend ourselves kind of very crudely against what has given to us. So that's the first point. Preoccupation with future. There's a lot of Western thought being directed towards future. Whereas in India we find it as we are stuck in a kind of a time war. We constantly look up to some kind of imaginary, glorious idea, and we don't want to progress, go beyond that in thought. So I find we are unprogressive because of that kind of a mental knock. What's your comment?
The first is about the contributions from the West to Indian
and why
culture.
we are not able to assimilate them, and we can
But
defend
I should have thought, on the contrary, that India was tremendously assimilative. Because if you see what we call Indian culture is a very loose term. We all know that. It has many components. So of course it has its own native components. For example, let us say the Vedic line, Buddhism, Jainism, and all the future developments, and then the rural religions, the tribal religions or belief systems and so on. All of that has contributed to Indian culture. But it's not it's not again a monolithic thing. And it has assimilated. For example, it assimilated a little bit from the Greeks when they invaded. It assimilated from the Persians. But it is true that while it has assimilated as much as it could from Islamic contributions, especially in the arts, That would be perhaps the field where it most assimilated from Islam, and so on. So assimilation has never been a problem. The problem is that there has not been an authority to decide things in India. There has never been a clergy or as I said, there has not been a ruler trying to dictate what should be the culture, what should be the religion. So therefore, it has always been organic. The growth and development of Indian culture has always been organic. This is quite clear in Indian history. So I think that during the colonial time, which is where we see, of course, the biggest presence of the West, Indians have tried to assimilate a little bit of, for example, there are lots of studies on the growth of modern science in the 19th century. This is one way by which some Western contributions undeniably have entered into India. See how Westerns, I don't want to call it Western science, let's say post-industrial revolution science, that would be the correct phrase. It's a bit long. See how it was accepted without any ideological issue in India. Remember how Darwin's evolution theory was opposed in Europe, fiercely opposed by Christianity. But in India, there was absolutely no difficulty. Omitting the recent declaration by a minister, forgetting about that, apart from that, it was immediately assimilated without any problem. In fact, it happened to be more or less in tune with certain Indian concepts of evolution, which were not materialistic, which were more in the mythical world, but they were in tune with that. Or if you take all advances of physics, they were also accepted readily. So I don't know how you mean that it's only in the religious field that Christianity encountered difficulty in converting India. The first missionaries were quite hopeful that within a decade or two, and we have Macaulay himself boasting about it, that within a decade or two, India would be Christianized. It didn't happen for a variety of reasons. So that was one field that there was a lot of resistance. But otherwise, what people like Sri Aurobindo, Tilak and others have said is that let us accept whatever new thought can come to us. Even the concept of nationalism in the sense of freedom struggle to achieve the status of nationhood was a European concept. And this they readily admitted. They took inspiration from the Italian revolutionaries, from the French Revolution. They were reading all these great European revolutionaries. These were the staple texts that Indian revolutionaries were reading. So they did not deny that they were influenced. In fact, there's a beautiful quote, I think, from Lala Lajpat Rai in this respect. So the influence is not, there was nothing like a stagnant, waterproof Indian culture. I don't see that.
In terms of science, right, it's very skinny, penetration of scientific thought and
yes.
way of looking at life and world.
Huh.
It hasn't really gone very deep into Indian psyche. It's still quite skinny. We have to believe in this Indian science and Indian past, everything is, I don't know, this fuzzy thing called, foggy thing called Indian, and we try to translate everything into that without learning it on its own.
You know, those who, do you mean to say, for example, those, do you mean to say those who dream of a glorious ancient age? But you know, those who speak of a glorious ancient past where India knew everything are those who are the most ignorant of India's past. Because the more you study, and quite objectively and rigorously, the more you see that, yes, there was undeniably certain scientific achievements in mathematics, in astronomy, there's no doubt. In chemistry, there was some groping around. In a lot of technologies, metallurgy, for example, there were great advances, no doubt, and they're very well documented. So it's only those who have not studied the development of ideas, the march of ideas in ancient India, who dream of a glorious age where everything was perfect. That age never existed.
Hello, sir. Namaste, sir. I actually wanted to ask about the definition of secularism which exists in the general youth when we have a chat with them. Basically,
Definition of secularism in, sorry?
I mean, generally, if you have a chat with some youngsters, the basic definition of secularism, which I understand after having a chat with them,
Yeah.
basically, it's like there is a disguised bias minority, disguise of bias towards minority people. That is like normal secularism for them. But certain sections of like society, like they tend to be like, for them, they space the definition of secularism, saying it like being a hard secularism, like you can say hard lining of secularism. For example, they may say that if you oppose something, then they will say by demonizing the Hindu thing, they will say that so what, it exists in Hindus too. So for example, like the recent coin term, like which is Hindu terror, as you all know. So basically, when you have
No, let's not go into the issue of terrorism because that will complicate the whole debate. It's quite a separate issue. The point is that many people in India have many different definitions. Since they do not, very briefly, since they do not want to use the dictionary definition, which normally is implied in the Constitution because no definition is given, but that dictionary definition is very embarrassing because once you apply it rigorously, you can see that it doesn't actually apply to the Constitution. So therefore, they will create all kinds of fuzzy, what I call fuzzy definitions. You know, they will say, for example, that we do not deal with any religion. All right? But you have heard so-called, for example, political parties, all of them call themselves secular. But all of them, without exception, have appealed to religious feelings. All of them, including supposedly atheist parties like the communist parties, they have allied themselves to religious groups which appeal to religion. Perhaps the only exception to my statement would be certain minor regional parties which are more appealing to a particular jati, a particular group of, so these are small regional parties, but all the major national parties invariably have used a religious card without any exception. So what are secular parties in India, I have not been able to figure out because they will not give you the definition of what they mean by secular. So this is the whole difficulty, that we are unable to force a debate where we say, give us your definition, tell us, let us discuss. So and the ridiculous part is that, you know, I am more secular than thou. This is the whole thing, you know, I'm more secular than thou. And people say, you know, you are unsecular, I am secular. How can a person be secular? What do you mean when you say I am secular? Do you mean I am tolerant? If so, just say that you are tolerant. Do you mean you are broad-minded? If so, just say you are broad-minded. Do you mean you are atheist? In that case, say you are atheist. They're using this word as a kind of hypocritical, all-meaning term. It has all meanings, you know. But it is basically, it hides an intellectual hypocrisy.
Just one second. Can I ask a question? Thank you, sir, for your talk. It has definitely triggered quite a few things that we can ponder about. I have two questions. One, the fact that you talked about Dharma Nirapeksha Rashtra, which is used in the Constitution, don't you think that's a very misleading term, in the sense that if you like give up dharma, then you cannot have a nation state? But rather it should be probably a faith-based thing, which is not, I mean, there should be a distinction between dharma and mata in that sense. And hello, yeah. And secondly, continuing from what he spoke about, given that secular has this, you know, varied definitions, how do you like take on or continue a civilized debate or you know, have a good conversation on the fact? So what normally would happen is that there would be two people and they'll be debating on something which they think is secular, and both the people will have different definitions. Conversation there.
second question I cannot answer because that depends on the interlocutors. If people cannot agree to have a civilized debate on good intellectual foundations, then you can't help it. The first question is quite appropriate. You have flagged a point. You flagged the point that the word dharma is used in Hindi, not in Sanskrit, mind you, in Hindi as the term for religion. Is it justified? In fact, I have long back objected to this use of dharma for religion. Religion is an English word, right? Like secularism. So it applies to Judaism, Christianity, Islam, first of all, and incidentally to other religions not of the book, okay? Is dharma a proper term to cover the wide range that religion covers? I don't think so. The Indian idea of dharma is something very different, which does not even require belief in a god. You can be dharmic without having belief in a god, right? Dharma is a very elastic term which includes religion partly, spirituality, it includes truth, it includes justice, it includes the cosmic order. All of that is implied in dharma, and of course ethics. So therefore, to have used the word dharma to actually be the equivalent of the European term religion is very tricky, and it introduces a lot of confusions. So I wish that Indian languages could have had another term for religion which would be more equivalent and not dharma. That would help remove a lot of confusions. You do have a point there.
You mentioned during your talk that India has shown great capacity to assimilate other ideas. And I just want to highlight something that's going on now, a particular process where there are contradicts what we always believe being assimilated. I hope it's not off topic, but I'm talking specifically an increasing tendency in Christianity to adopt Indian Hindu symbols and rites and ways, which was not so in 75, 76. It was not so when I was very young. They used to be very rigid about these things. They wanted to stand out as being separate. But now there seems to be a tendency to want to look less separate, in fact, not separate at all. And I want to know, is that a reflection on Indians' ability to assimilate, which has stopped, and there's a fight back, or they have tried this as a new strategy to woo Indians? I really don't know. I'm very confused. I wanted your personal opinion.
You are not the only one. You are not the only one to be confused, because the Christians themselves are confused on this point. This is the debate. This is the debate known as the debate on inculturation. Should Christianity adapt itself? And this is not limited to India. The same problem occurred in Africa, in Latin America. Should Christianity adapt itself to the modern Mayans? Should it allow the modern Mayans to keep some of their customs and dresses and etc.? Or should it impose a more rigid Orthodox Christianity? So this problem of inculturation of Christianity was addressed in Vatican II under Paul VI. Paul VI was the Pope who called for this debate.
Which year?
Vatican II was 1963 or 4, I'm not very sure. You can please check. 1960s for sure. And this was one of the questions in Vatican II, which was seen as a very progressive adaptation of the Roman Catholic Christianity, where this problem was put by a number of bishops, some of them from India, saying that, our followers would like to be allowed to keep some of their native customs. They feel uncomfortable because, after all, why should Christianity be so Western to an Indian follower? Okay? So Paul VI was fairly progressive in this sense and argued in favor of inculturation, saying that, yes, you can adopt local customs, there's no bar on it. And then two things happened. One, certain missionaries, as you said, saw some good potential in that method, that let us look more like Indians. Let us so you had some Jesuits dressed exactly like Swamis, renunciates, and opening an ashram. It was called ashram. There was a famous one in Trichy here, etc. So that was one aspect. The other aspect was that a number of bishops in particular were very uncomfortable, because what they said was, look, if we go too far in this and we allow our followers to be too close to what Hindus look like, might that not be reabsorbed into Hinduism? Where will we draw a line? So that debate is going on, and this, depending on, so of course the more orthodox, like especially then the arrival of the evangelists, the Protestant evangelists, complicated everything because they are extremely strict on their view of what Christianity should be. For example, Paul VI had admitted that a good human being would not go to hell regardless of his religion. This was a major departure of Roman Catholic creed. He said a good human being will not go to hell. But evangelists, Protestant evangelists, do not agree with this. So all these debates will go on. Yeah, sure.
I agree that the idea of secularism in India is very fuzzy. I agree to that. But with the Nazism-inspired party currently in power at Delhi, if...
Excuse me, can you repeat that phrase? Yeah.
The Nazi-inspired party currently in power at Delhi, if we disregard whatever the idea of secularism we have right now, I agree it's very, very fuzzy and it's going in some wrong direction. If we disregard it completely right now, won't we turn into another Pakistan?
Okay, look. Look. This is what I call demonization. I would, if you, wait, listen. If you say this party, I have no political inclination, I want to reassure you, because I'm dissatisfied with all parties personally in India. Okay, but if you say this party is Nazi-inspired, please show me the concentration camps. No, wait a minute. Wait a minute. You cannot use these terms without... What was Hitler's doctrine? It was Deutschland über alles. And he started military campaigns to recapture the whole of the Germanic world, which was his conception, and then extend beyond, and to impose the master Aryan race. And therefore open the concentration camp as the final solution. Where are all these things in India today? Nowhere. So please do not use cheap demonization, because this kills every intellectual debate. You remove that term, and we can have an informed, civilized debate. And I welcome any amount of disagreement, but I cannot discuss with anybody who uses demonization. That defeats the whole purpose. Thank you.
May I just one, please? Sir, one question. Why was the word secular brought in the first place? I think that's an important
You see, the word secularism, actually I do not know. To be frank, I don't know why in 1974 who parachuted this term, perhaps Indira Gandhi herself.
The communists were part of the government. The communists or the Soviet influence was...
True.
Socialist secular was brought...
True. See, you are right. See, as we know, you have seen all these quotes in the Constituent Assembly. So the concept of secularism was already floating about. And there was already a big debate as to whether it should be enshrined or not. And the Constituent Assembly finally decided no, that we don't need that concept. So 1974, Indira Gandhi wanted to, as we all know, to change the constitution to her advantage, to avoid certain prosecutions and so on. That was the historical background. And yes, she had an alliance with the Communist Party of India, especially she made Nurul Hasan, who was in those days governor of West Bengal, but a staunch communist. She made him Minister of Education. In those days it was education. And there was a deal, yes. And I do think, but I would request to have some further study on this to be very sure. I think you are right, sir, that it was that the left parties were the ones who demanded the insertion of these two terms. But let us go. This is just a historical question. We can go and check it. It doesn't really matter in the end.
The phrase secular was used to soft wrap socialist. It was a wrapping for socialism, which was the communist agenda.
See, socialism means anything and everything.
That's another wrap for
Nehru had always declared himself to be a socialist anyway. So socialism in itself was really not a very revolutionary term. Whether it was there in the constitution or not there made absolutely no difference whatsoever. The one term which made a difference was secular. But as I said, it's for the nation to decide. If you want to be if we want to be, I'm part of this nation incidentally, I'm an Indian citizen. If we want to be a secular nation, or if we don't want to be, fine, but let's be honest with other choices, clear on the meaning of the terms, and take the consequences to the logical conclusion, which we are not doing.
and it should be balanced all around, not unequal secular.
Thank you very much.
Friends, please wait for some time. We'll have national anthem. I will just have a small function and then we'll finish off with national anthem.
Thank you, sir. Now I request our faculty advisor, Professor Rama Shankar Verma ji, to present a memento to the chief guest as a token of appreciation. No, sir. Thank you, sir. I invite Kanti Kumari ji to deliver vote of thanks.
Namaste. We consider ourselves to be blessed to have Prof.Michel Danino ji as the speaker for the second annual Sri Bankim Chand Chattopadhyay Memorial Lecture. The speech was really enlightening to all of us. Thank you, Michel Danino ji, for allocating time for us in your busy schedule. For the progress of the society, we need to have mutual respect, not mutual tolerance. I, Kanti Kumari, on behalf of Vande Mataram family, would like to thank each one for the unconditional love and support that you have shown to us for the last 3 years. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our faculties, alumni, students, technical experts for the lights, sound and videography. Once again, thank to all, one and all. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
Thank you, Kanti Kumari ji. Now I request Professor Rama Shankar Verma ji to speak 2 words.
Thank you all. Actually, I am very happy to have this kind of discussion. I think this is the first time we have learned at least some of our constitution, which is a very good, I think, this kind of thoughts that word secularism has to be, analyzed and also be, thoughtfully think about what is that mean basically. And I am very thankful to Michel to come here and give us at least some of the knowledge which we are very happy to be enlightened by this talk. I would say that on behalf of Vande Mataram and faculty advisor, I really sincerely think that we should have a more participation from the faculty and students, and this kind of debate would definitely enlighten at least in this atmosphere. And thank you for coming, all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I request everyone to stand up for the national anthem. I request Hari Ganesh ji once again to come and sing our national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंधु गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल वंगा
विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभाशिष मागे गाहे तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे। थैंक यू।